Antimatter is usually described as something explosive and rare. It appears in headlines about particle accelerators. It shows up in films as a glowing fuel source or a weapon capable of destroying entire cities. The word itself sounds unstable, almost forbidden, as if it belongs to a different layer of reality. It is often treated as a second kind of material, an exotic counterpart stored somewhere else in the universe, a dangerous opposite to the matter we are familiar with. That picture feels intuitive. If matter builds the ordinary world, then antimatter must be made of some opposite substance, something fundamentally different, something separate. But before accepting that image, slow down. Take something ordinary, a piece of metal, a glass of water, the air in a room. All of it is built from atoms. Atoms are built from protons, neutrons, and electrons, and those are built from a small set of more fundamental particles. Electrons carry negative charge, protons carry positive charge. Quarks combine in specific ways to give those particles their structure. From this short list of ingredients, everything solid is assembled. Now here is the quiet tension. If antimatter were a completely different substance, it would need a completely different set of ingredients. A second inventory of fundamental building blocks. But the laws of physics do not introduce a second inventory. They introduce mirrors. For every electron there exists a particle with the same mass and spin, but opposite electric charge. For every quark, there is a corresponding antiquark. The properties match almost perfectly. Only certain signs reverse. So what is antimatter actually made of? Is it a separate material layered onto reality? If you enjoy these kind of questions, I would like to invite you to like the video and consider subscribing to the channel. It will help us out a lot. And if there's something about the universe you find yourself wondering about now and then, share it with us in the comments below. It might become the next question we might explore. With that said, let's get back. Because if antimatter is not a different substance, then the question shifts. We are no longer asking what it is made of. We are asking what a particle is, if its mirror must exist. And that is where the descent begins. Picture a glass chamber filled with a thin vapor. The air inside is carefully prepared so that it is ready to condense into tiny droplets at the slightest disturbance. At first, nothing is visible. The space looks empty. Then a charged particle passes through. As it moves, it disturbs the vapor along its path. The vapor condenses into a fine line of droplets, tracing the particle's motion. What was invisible becomes briefly visible as a thin white streak suspended in mist. Now add something else to the chamber. A magnetic field passes through it, steady and uniform. The field itself cannot be seen, but its presence changes how charged particles move. A particle entering this region does not continue in a straight line. The magnetic field pushes sideways on it. The direction of that sideways push depends entirely on one property, the sign of the particle's electric charge. A negatively charged particle curves one way. A positively charged particle curves the opposite way. Nothing else about the particle matters for that direction. Not its name, not its origin. Only the sign of its charge determines which way it bends. Now imagine observing a track in the chamber that curves to the left. Under the known direction of the magnetic field, that curvature tells you immediately that the particle carries negative charge. Then you see another track. It has the same thickness, the same sharpness, the same overall shape, but it bends in the opposite direction. The field has not changed, the chamber has not changed. Only the particle's charge can explain that mirrored curvature. This is not speculation, it is mechanical necessity. The sideways force depends on charge sign. Reverse the sign, and the direction of curvature reverses. So when physicists first saw tracks that looked like electrons in every way, Except for the direction they curved, the conclusion was not dramatic, it was structural. Something existed with the same mass-like behavior as an electron, but with opposite charge, a mirror written directly into the arc of its path. And once that curvature was seen, the idea of antimatter stopped being abstract. Stay inside that mist-filled chamber. You have already seen that opposite bending means opposite charge. The magnetic field pushes sideways, and the sign of the charge determines the direction of that push. Reverse the sign, and the particle curves the other way. But direction is only half of what the arc reveals. Look carefully at the shape of the curve itself. Some tracks bend tightly, forming small circles. Others bend gently, sweeping through wide arcs before leaving the chamber. That difference is not cosmetic. It tells you how strongly the magnetic field is able to redirect the particle's motion. The field applies the same sideways influence to every charged particle that enters it. But particles do not all respond equally. A lighter particle is easier to redirect. Its path curves sharply. A heavier particle resists that sideways change in direction. Its path bends more gradually. The radius of curvature becomes a direct measure of how much inertia the particle carries. Now, compare the mirrored tracks. The opposite bending particle does not merely resemble an electron in thickness or brightness. Its arc has the same radius as an electron moving under the same conditions. The tightness of the curve matches. That means something very specific. Its resistance to deflection matches. Its inertia matches. Its effective mass matches. Not approximately. Not within a large margin of error. The same. At this point, the mirror deepens. The particle bending the opposite way is not just carrying reverse charge, it is carrying the same mass as the electron, the same mechanical response to a magnetic field, the same interaction strength. Two measurable properties now align perfectly. Charge sign is reversed, mass is preserved. This combination is not arbitrary. It removes the possibility that the track belongs to a heavier proton or a lighter unknown fragment. The curvature rules that out. The chamber is not offering a distorted cousin of the electron. It is revealing a structural twin. And when both direction and curvature match in this mirrored way, coincidence becomes untenable. The symmetry is exact. So now the tension sharpens. If nature produces particles that share mass and behavior so precisely, differing only by charge sign, then this is not a random duplication. It is something enforced. The question is no longer whether the mirror exists. The question becomes why the mirror must exist at all. Imagine a burst of pure light moving through empty space. Not a beam you can see, just a photon carrying enough energy to matter. On its own, it travels silently. It leaves no trail. It has no charge. Nothing bends it in a magnetic field. But when that photon passes near a heavy atomic nucleus, something unusual can occur. The photon disappears. In its place, two particles appear. Not one, two. They move away from each other immediately. One curves as an electron would. The other curves in the opposite direction, just as the mirrored track did earlier. This is not coincidence. It is conservation at work. Charge must balance. Before the event, total charge was 0. The photon carried none. Afterward, total charge must still be 0. So if one particle carries negative charge, the other must carry positive charge of equal magnitude. Mass must also be accounted for. The photon had no rest mass, but it carried energy. That energy reorganizes into two particles whose combined mass corresponds exactly to the energy supplied. Nothing is created from nothing. Energy transforms into structure, and the structure comes in pairs. This is called pair creation, though the name comes later. Mechanically, what matters is this: the positive particle does not appear as a defect or anomaly. It appears simultaneously with the electron. It is born with it. They are not unrelated entities. They are produced by the same transformation. The same event gives rise to both. That forces a deeper conclusion. The opposite charge particle is not a rare accident of matter. It is not a fragment. It is not a heavier or lighter cousin. It is required. Whenever enough energy condenses into an electron, the mirrored counterpart must also form. The symmetry is not aesthetic. It is enforced by the bookkeeping rules of the universe. So now the mirror we saw in the magnetic field is no longer isolated evidence. It is part of a rule. Energy reorganizing into matter does so symmetrically, which means the existence of the electron already implies the existence of its opposite. The mirror is not optional. It is built into the structure of how matter comes into being. And that raises a sharper question. If every creation event produces both, why does the world around us seem made almost entirely of one side of the pair? To tighten that question, imagine reversing what we just watched. Instead of a photon turning into two particles, picture an electron drifting through space and encountering its mirrored counterpart. A positron approaches. They do not collide like billiard balls. They do not merge into something heavier. They do not form a stable compound the way electrons bind to protons. When they meet, something far more precise happens. They disappear. In their place, two photons shoot away in opposite directions. The matter is gone, not scattered, not broken apart into smaller fragments, completely converted. This process is called annihilation, but the name is less important than what it reveals. For annihilation to restore pure radiation cleanly, the two particles must match each other in a very specific way. Their masses must be identical so that the energy released equals exactly twice the electron's rest mass. Their charges must cancel perfectly so that total charge remains zero before and after. Their internal quantum properties must be mirrored so that nothing is left over. And nothing is left over. The photons carry away precisely the amount of energy expected. No residue remains, no imbalance lingers. The accounting closes perfectly. That precision tells you something deeper than pair creation did. Creation showed us that energy condenses symmetrically. Annihilation shows us that the symmetry is exact. The positron is not merely similar to the electron. It is structurally identical in mass and behavior, differing only by the sign of its charge and the reversal of certain quantum properties. If even one internal feature were different, annihilation would not resolve so cleanly. So now the mirror is complete. Creation produces them together. Annihilation erases them together. The symmetry is not decorative. It is enforced at every step, and that means something unavoidable. Whatever an electron fundamentally is, the positron must be made of the same underlying structure, only reflected. At this point, the question, what is antimatter made of, stops sounding exotic and starts sounding structural. Because if the positron behaves in every measurable way like an electron except for charge sign, then we are not dealing with a different substance. We are dealing with the same recipe written with opposite signs. Mass is identical. Interaction strength with magnetic fields is identical. The energy released in annihilation matches exactly. Even the way they respond to electric fields mirrors perfectly. Every test strips away the possibility that antimatter is constructed from some hidden alternative material. It is not built from new ingredients. It is built from the same ones, arranged with reversed charge and reversed internal quantum orientation. And that is where the question becomes sharper. If the positron is the mirror of the electron, then what about the proton? What about the neutron? What about the particles inside them? Because ordinary matter is not just electrons floating freely, it is atoms. It is nuclei made from smaller components. It is layered. If antimatter is truly a mirror at the fundamental level, that mirroring must extend downward through every layer of structure. It cannot stop at the electron. So now imagine scaling inward. A proton is not elementary. It is built from quarks, bound together by gluons. Those quarks carry fractional electric charges. Their arrangement gives the proton its positive charge and mass. If symmetry is real, then somewhere there must exist an antiproton. Not a reverse proton in the sense of flipped orientation, but a proton built from antiquarks instead of quarks. Quarks whose charges are inverted. Quarks whose internal quantum numbers are reversed. And we do find them. In high-energy collisions, antiprotons appear. They curve in magnetic fields exactly as expected for particles with the same mass as protons but opposite charge. When an antiproton meets a proton, annihilation occurs again. Energy replaces matter with the same precise accounting. The mirror extends inward. An antiproton is made of antiquarks. An antineutron is made of antiquarks. A positron is the anti-version of the electron. Antimatter, then, is not a special compound. It is matter built from antiparticles. And antiparticles are not different building blocks. They are the same fundamental fields excited in a way that carries opposite charge and reversed internal quantum numbers. That realization removes something important. Antimatter is not a separate category of stuff sitting somewhere else in the periodic table. It is not made from a mysterious dark ingredient. It is made from anti-electrons, anti-quarks, anti-protons, anti-neutrons, which are mirror excitations of the same underlying fields that make ordinary matter. The difference is not in what they are made from. The difference is in how the signs of their properties are oriented, and that shifts the center of the question again. If antimatter is made from the same fundamental fields as matter, then perhaps the better question is not what it is made of, but why the universe allows both orientations at all. Why does the mirror exist, and why does one side dominate what we see? If antimatter is made of anti-electrons and anti-quarks, and those are mirrors of ordinary particles, then the next layer must move deeper than particles themselves. At the most fundamental level we currently understand, particles are not tiny solid beads. An electron is not a miniature sphere with a surface and interior. A quark is not a grain of substance. What actually exists everywhere, even in what we call empty space, are fields. The electron field exists throughout all of space. The up quark field exists everywhere. The down quark field exists everywhere. These fields are not localized objects. They are continuous structures woven into the fabric of the universe. A particle is what happens when one of these fields vibrates in a specific quantized way. When the electron field is excited with a particular amount of energy, that localized excitation is what we call an electron. Its mass is the energy bound in that vibration. Its electric charge reflects how that field couples to the electromagnetic field. Now comes the structural detail that closes the gap. The equations describing the electron field do not permit only one kind of excitation. They naturally produce two. One carries negative electric charge, the other carries positive electric charge. Both arise from the same underlying field. They are not built from different materials. They are not assembled from separate components. They are two allowed modes of excitation of a single field that fills space. If the field exists, both solutions exist. The same holds for quark fields. Each quark field supports quark excitations and anti-quark excitations. A proton is a stable configuration of 3 quark excitations. An antiproton is the same configuration, but built from anti-quark excitations of the same fields. Nothing new is added to the universe to create antimatter. No extra ingredient is introduced. Antimatter is matter composed of antiparticle excitations, and antiparticles are not foreign entities. They are the mirror modes already embedded in the structure of the fields themselves. So, the answer tightens. Antimatter is made of anti-electrons, anti-quarks, and the composite structures built from them. Those antiparticles are excitations of the very same fundamental fields that produce ordinary matter, differing only by the sign of charge and certain quantum numbers that are intrinsically paired within the equations. The mirror is not imposed, it is inherent. Once the field exists, both orientations are unavoidable. From here, the structure can only deepen further into how those quantum numbers reverse and why the symmetry is mathematically enforced. The difference between matter and antimatter does not lie in ingredients. It lies in how fundamental properties are oriented. Start with electric charge. An electron carries negative charge. A positron carries positive charge. That sounds like a simple label, but charge is not a physical fluid stored inside a particle. It is not a substance you could scoop out or pour in. Charge describes how a particle's field interacts with the electromagnetic field that fills all of space. When the electron field vibrates in one allowed mode, its excitation interacts with the electromagnetic field in a way we call negative. Place it in an electric field and it accelerates in one direction. Put it in a magnetic field and it curves one way. The same field supports a second mode of vibration. In that mode, the interaction reverses. The response to electric fields flips. The curvature in magnetic fields flips. Every measurable electromagnetic behavior changes sign. Nothing material has been swapped. The interaction pattern has inverted. This inversion is not cosmetic. It is enforced by the symmetry of the underlying equations. The field equations that describe charged particles remain consistent only if reversing charge also reverses certain internal quantum numbers. The mirrored excitation must transform in a coordinated way. You cannot flip charge alone without flipping the structure that supports it. Mass comes from how the field stores energy in its vibration. That storage mechanism does not depend on the direction of electromagnetic coupling, so the mass remains identical in both orientations. That pairing is precise. Charge reverses, mass stays the same. Interaction strength stays the same. Quantum numbers tied to charge reverse together. This is not a superficial mirroring. It is structural symmetry at the level of how the field is allowed to exist. The word often used for this operation is charge conjugation. It means taking a particle's field excitation and replacing it with the conjugate excitation that carries opposite charge while preserving the rest of the structure required by the theory. The field does not prefer one orientation over the other. Both are permitted. Both are equally valid solutions. Antimatter is not constructed from alternate building blocks. It is built from the same fields vibrating in the conjugate orientation. That means the anti in antimatter does not mean opposite substance. It means opposite charge orientation within the same fundamental field framework. The mirror is not optional decoration. It is written into the symmetry of how charge fields are defined at all. Charge is the most visible reversal, but it is not the only one. Every fundamental particle carries a set of quantum numbers. These are not decorative labels. They determine how a particle interacts, how it combines with others, and which processes are allowed or forbidden. Electric charge is one of them. There are others tied to how particles participate in the weak force and the strong force. When a particle is replaced by its antiparticle, these quantum numbers reverse in a coordinated way. Take the electron again. Beyond its negative electric charge, it carries a property called lepton number. This number keeps track of how many leptons exist in a system. In ordinary processes, lepton number is conserved. An electron has lepton number +1. A positron carries lepton number -1. When an electron and positron annihilate, their lepton numbers cancel just as their electric charges cancel. The bookkeeping closes in every column, not just one. The same structure appears in quarks. Quarks carry a property called baryon number. 3 quarks together form a proton with baryon number +1. 3 antiquarks form an antiproton with baryon number -1. When proton and antiproton meet, baryon number balances to 0 as energy replaces both. These reversals are not arbitrary adjustments. They are enforced by the symmetry structure of the underlying fields. The conjugate excitation carries opposite charge and opposite associated quantum numbers because the equations that define the field require it. Mass remains unchanged. Spin remains unchanged in magnitude. The intrinsic angular momentum is the same size, though its orientation relative to motion can differ. Interaction strengths remain identical, so antimatter is not loosely opposite matter. It is matter with every conserved charge like quantum number inverted, while mass and structural dynamics remain intact. That is a tight definition. An anti-electron is not made of different stuff. It is the electron field vibrating in the mode where all charge-related quantum numbers reverse sign together. An anti-quark is not built from alternate material. It is the same quark field in the conjugate excitation, carrying opposite electric charge and opposite baryon number. Once this is understood, antimatter stops being mysterious material and becomes symmetric structure. It is not a new ingredient added to the universe. It is the unavoidable mirror configuration allowed by the same fields that produce ordinary matter. From here, the chain descends further into composite structure, because atoms themselves can also exist in mirrored form. Move one layer upward from particles to structure. Ordinary matter is not just electrons and quarks drifting freely. Electrons bind to nuclei. Quarks bind into protons and neutrons. Protons and neutrons bind into atomic nuclei. Structure emerges from interaction. Now consider what happens when the mirrored ingredients assemble. An antiproton carries the same mass as a proton, but opposite electric charge and opposite baryon number. A positron carries the same mass as an electron, but opposite electric charge and opposite lepton number. Place an antiproton and a positron together. They bind. The electromagnetic attraction between opposite charges works exactly the same way it does in ordinary hydrogen. The positron orbits the antiproton just as the electron orbits the proton. The allowed energy levels are identical. The spectral lines emitted when the positron transitions between levels match those of hydrogen precisely. This is anti-hydrogen. It is not exotic chemistry. It is the mirror of hydrogen. Go further. Antiprotons and antineutrons can bind into antinuclei. Add anti-electrons and you obtain anti-atoms. In laboratories, physicists have created anti-hydrogen and trapped it long enough to measure its properties. Its mass matches hydrogen. Its spectral fingerprints match hydrogen. Gravity appears to act on it in the same way. Nothing about its internal mechanics is unstable by default. Antimatter atoms are not explosive by nature. They only release energy when they encounter ordinary matter, because their opposite quantum numbers allow annihilation. Left alone, antimatter can form stable structures built entirely from antiparticles. This matters for the original question. What is antimatter made of? It is made of anti-electrons, anti-quarks, anti-protons, anti-neutrons. These assemble into anti-atoms using the same electromagnetic rules that build ordinary atoms. The forces do not change. The fields do not change. Only the orientation of conserved quantum numbers changes. So antimatter is not a different layer of physics. It is ordinary physics operating with conjugated excitations. The mirror extends seamlessly from fundamental fields to composite particles to full atomic structure. Nothing new has been introduced. Only the sign of certain properties has flipped, and the rest of structure follows inevitably from that reversal. Picture an anti-hydrogen atom suspended in a vacuum chamber. There is no ordinary matter nearby, no stray atoms drifting through, just empty space and electromagnetic traps holding it in place. Inside that anti-atom, nothing is unstable. The antiproton and positron attract each other exactly the way a proton and electron do. The electromagnetic force does not care whether the charge labels are positive or negative. It only cares that opposite charges attract. The binding energy is the same. The orbital structure is the same. The allowed quantum states are the same. An antiatom does not decay simply because it is antimatter. It does not spontaneously convert into radiation. It persists. This tells you something decisive. Antimatter is not inherently volatile. It is not made of a substance that wants to explode. The dramatic energy release people associate with antimatter happens only when matter and antimatter meet, because their quantum numbers cancel perfectly and allow annihilation. Left alone, antimatter behaves normally. The strong force binds antiquarks into antiprotons, just as it binds quarks into protons. The electromagnetic force binds positrons to antinuclei, just as it binds electrons to nuclei. The weak force operates in the same way inside antiparticles as it does inside particles, with the same probabilities and decay channels mirrored accordingly. Every fundamental interaction applies symmetrically. So, antimatter is not exotic in behavior. It is exotic in context. In a universe dominated by ordinary matter, antimatter encounters its opposite quickly and annihilation follows. But structurally, there is no instability built into its composition. This reinforces the emerging answer. Antimatter is made of the same fundamental fields. It is built from antiparticles that are mirror excitations of those fields. Those antiparticles assemble into antiatoms through the same forces that build atoms. Nothing in the construction is fragile. Nothing in the structure is incomplete. The mirror holds at every layer so far. From fundamental field excitation to composite atomic structure, antimatter follows the same rules, obeys the same forces, and maintains the same internal stability as ordinary matter. The difference is not in what it is made of. The difference is in the orientation of its conserved quantum properties, and that orientation alone is enough to determine whether contact leads to peaceful coexistence or complete conversion into light. Now slow down the moment when matter and antimatter meet. An electron approaches a positron. They are not aware of each other in any conscious sense, but their fields overlap. Each is an excitation of the same electron field, carrying opposite electric charge and opposite lepton number. When they come close enough, the electromagnetic interaction intensifies. Their opposite charges pull them together. But what happens next is not simply attraction. The two excitations of the field can combine. Because they are conjugate modes of the same field, their quantum numbers cancel exactly when brought into the same region of space. Electric charge sums to zero. Lepton number sums to zero. Momentum and energy redistribute. Once the conserved quantities are balanced, nothing prevents the field from relaxing back into its lower energy state. The localized excitations vanish. The energy stored in their mass and motion reappears as excitations of a different field, typically the electromagnetic field in the form of photons. This is not destruction in the dramatic sense, it is conversion. The electron field no longer holds those two excitations. Instead, the electromagnetic field carries the energy away. Annihilation is possible only because particle and antiparticle are excitations of the same underlying field. If they were made of different substances, cancellation would not occur so cleanly. The field would not allow its positive and negative modes to neutralize one another. The symmetry that allowed their creation together is the same symmetry that allows their erasure together. This completes a structural loop. Field excitation can split from energy into two mirrored modes. Those mirrored modes can recombine into pure energy. Nothing exotic is required. The field itself contains both possibilities. So antimatter is not made of something that destroys matter. It is made of the same excitations arranged in the conjugate orientation. Destruction happens only because the bookkeeping closes perfectly when opposite quantum numbers meet. The mechanism is clean because the structure is symmetric. From here, one final layer of composition remains to be clarified: how deep this mirroring extends into the smallest known constituents of matter itself. Picture a proton and an antiproton created side by side in a high-energy collision. They curve in opposite directions in a magnetic field, so their electric charges are reversed. But measure how much energy was required to create each of them, and you find something striking. The amount is identical. Mass does not flip sign. That detail matters because it clarifies what is actually reversing when we talk about antimatter. Charge reverses. Certain quantum numbers reverse, but mass remains positive and equal. Mass, in quantum field terms, is not a label attached to a particle. It reflects how much energy is required to excite the underlying field into that particle state. The proton field, the electron field, the quark fields, all have intrinsic energy costs built into their structure. To create an excitation of a given field, you must supply that energy. When the field vibrates in the particle mode, that energy appears as mass. When it vibrates in the antiparticle mode, the same amount of energy is required. The field does not distinguish between the two orientations in terms of how much energy the vibration stores. This is why an electron and a positron have the same mass. It is why a proton and an antiproton weigh the same. The mass comes from the structure of the field itself and from interactions with the Higgs field that permeates space. That mechanism does not depend on electric charge sign, so antimatter is not lighter or heavier matter. It is not negative mass. It does not fall upward or resist gravity differently because its mass is inverted. Its mass is the same. Only the direction of certain interactions reverses. This locks another piece into place. Antimatter is not made from alternate mass-giving ingredients. The mass of an antiparticle arises from the same field interactions that give mass to its matter counterpart. So, when we ask what antimatter is made of, we are not asking about reversed mass or inverted energy. We are asking about fields excited in the conjugate orientation with the same energy cost, the same inertial resistance, the same gravitational behavior. The symmetry holds not only in charge, but in the deeper energetic structure that defines what it means for something to have mass at all. Now, shift attention to another internal property: spin. Spin is not literal rotation. An electron is not a tiny sphere physically spinning in space. Spin is an intrinsic form of angular momentum built into the field excitation itself. It determines how the particle behaves under rotations and how it responds to magnetic fields at a deeper level. An electron has spin 1/2. That value is fixed. It does not depend on how fast the particle moves or how much energy it carries. It is part of the identity of the electron field. Create a positron and measure its spin. The magnitude is the same. It is also 1/2. The difference is not in how much spin it has, but in how its spin aligns relative to its charge and motion. Certain combinations that are allowed for electrons correspond to mirrored combinations for positrons, but the underlying angular momentum structure is identical. This matters because spin affects how particles combine. It controls whether particles obey the Pauli exclusion principle. It shapes atomic structure. It determines the statistics particles follow. Since antiparticles have the same spin magnitude as their counterparts, they follow the same statistical rules. A positron is a fermion just like an electron. It cannot occupy the same quantum state as another identical positron in the same system. An antiproton obeys the same fermionic behavior as a proton. Nothing about antimatter changes the spin class of the particle. This reinforces the pattern that has now become consistent across layers. Charge reverses. Certain conserved quantum numbers reverse. Mass remains the same. Spin magnitude remains the same. Interaction strengths remain the same. Antimatter does not alter the structural identity of the field. It inverts the sign of the quantities that define how the excitation couples to certain forces. So antimatter is not built from particles with different intrinsic geometry. It is built from particles whose intrinsic geometry is identical, but whose charge-related orientation is reversed. The mirror is precise and limited. It does not flip everything. It flips only what the field symmetry requires. This distinction prevents a common misunderstanding. Antimatter is not an upside-down version of matter in every respect. It is a conjugated version with specific quantum numbers inverted, while core structural properties remain intact. The deeper we examine composition, the more constrained and exact the answer becomes. Consider the photon. You have already seen that electrons have positrons, protons have antiprotons, quarks have antiquarks. Each charge field supports two conjugate excitations, but the photon behaves differently. There is no antiphoton. There is no separate mirror particle with opposite electric charge. The photon is its own antiparticle. To understand why, look at what distinguishes particles from antiparticles in the first place. The defining reversal is electric charge and other charge-like quantum numbers. The antiparticle carries opposite values of those conserved quantities. The photon carries none. It has no electric charge. It has no baryon number. It has no lepton number. There is nothing to invert. The electromagnetic field, when quantized, produces excitations that are neutral. Because the photon does not carry the kinds of quantum numbers that flip under charge conjugation, the conjugate operation leaves it unchanged. Apply the mirror transformation to the photon field, and you obtain the same excitation. That is why annihilation of an electron and positron produces photons. The combined quantum numbers cancel to zero, and the electromagnetic field can absorb the energy into neutral excitations that do not require a conjugate partner. This detail reinforces the structural theme. Antimatter is not defined by being strange or rare. It is defined by the presence of conjugate quantum numbers. Wherever those numbers exist, a mirrored excitation must exist. Where they do not exist, no separate antiparticle is required. The photon's neutrality makes it structurally self-conjugate. This clarifies something important about composition. Antimatter is not a universal mirror of everything. It mirrors only those particles whose defining properties include reversible charges. Neutral gauge bosons like photons do not acquire distinct antiversions because their defining quantum numbers already sit at 0. So when we say antimatter is made of antiparticles, we are speaking precisely about particles whose quantum numbers allow a conjugate counterpart. Where there is a sign to reverse, there is an antiparticle. Where there is no sign, the particle stands alone. This completes another structural layer in understanding what antimatter is composed of and why the mirror exists exactly where it does and nowhere else. Move inward again, into the heart of the proton. A proton is not a single particle in the simple sense. It is a bound state of 3 quark excitations held together by the strong force. That force is carried by gluons, which are themselves excitations of the gluon field. Quarks carry a type of charge called color charge. It has nothing to do with visual color. It is the property that allows them to interact through the strong force. There are 3 types, and quarks combine in such a way that the overall configuration is color neutral. Now consider an antiquark. Its electric charge is reversed as expected, but its color charge is also reversed in a precise way. If a quark carries one type of color charge, the antiquark carries the corresponding anticolor. This reversal is not optional. The equations governing the strong interaction require it. When 3 quarks bind into a proton, their color charges combine to form a neutral configuration. When 3 antiquarks bind, their anticolor charges combine to form an equally neutral configuration. The strong force does not distinguish between matter and antimatter in terms of strength. The binding energy inside an antiproton mirrors that inside a proton. The gluon interactions follow the same mathematical structure. This explains why an antiproton has the same mass as a proton. Most of a proton's mass does not come from the bare masses of the quarks themselves. It comes from the energy stored in the gluon field and in the motion of the quarks confined inside. Because the strong interaction treats quarks and antiquarks symmetrically, the internal energy structure of a proton and an antiproton is the same. The mirror reaches all the way into the most intense force we know. Antimatter is not weaker. It is not loosely bound. It is not fragile at the level of the strong force. Its internal confinement, its binding energy, and its structural dynamics are identical, with only the sign of color-related quantum numbers reversed. So when asking what antimatter is made of, the answer now extends cleanly into the deepest composite layer. It is made of antiquarks, bound by gluons into antiprotons and antineutrons, in exactly the same way quarks bind into protons and neutrons. The symmetry is not superficial. It penetrates through electromagnetic interaction, weak interaction, and strong interaction alike. Every fundamental force respects the mirrored structure at the level of composition. Shift focus to the weak interaction, the force responsible for certain forms of radioactive decay and for processes inside stars. Inside a neutron, a down quark can transform into an up quark through the weak force. That transformation changes the identity of the particle. A neutron becomes a proton. An electron and an antineutrino are emitted. The bookkeeping of charge and lepton number remains balanced. Now examine the mirrored process. Inside an antineutron, an anti-down quark can transform into an anti-up quark. The antineutron becomes an antiproton. A positron and a neutrino are emitted instead. The pattern is exact. Where matter emits an electron, antimatter emits a positron. Where matter emits an antineutrino, antimatter emits a neutrino. The weak force does not collapse the symmetry of composition. It preserves it in mirrored form. The equations governing weak interactions allow both directions of charge orientation, provided the associated quantum numbers reverse consistently. There is one subtlety here. The weak interaction distinguishes between left-handed and right-handed orientations of particles in a way electromagnetism and the strong force do not. This introduces an asymmetry in how certain processes occur. But even here, the existence of antiparticles is not optional. The mirrored excitations still exist. They simply participate according to the handedness rules embedded in the weak force. This confirms another structural layer. Antimatter is not exempt from decay rules. It does not behave unpredictably under the weak force. Antineutrons decay the same way neutrons do, just with conjugated products. The lifetimes match, the transformation rates align, composition remains parallel. Antimatter is built from the same quark and lepton fields. Those fields interact through the same three fundamental forces. The weak interaction does not introduce a new substance or a deviation in structure. It only applies the same transformation rules with reverse charge orientation. At this point, every fundamental force has been examined. Electromagnetism mirrors exactly. The strong force mirrors exactly. The weak force mirrors with conjugated outputs. Nothing in composition deviates. Antimatter is not a foreign architecture. It is the same architecture assembled from conjugate field excitations, governed by the same interactions at every level. At this depth, the symmetry no longer looks accidental. It looks enforced. There is a fundamental principle embedded in quantum field theory called CPT symmetry. The name comes from three operations: charge conjugation, parity, reversal, and time reversal. Without diving into formal mathematics, what matters is this: the core equations that describe relativistic quantum fields remain consistent only if all three operations together leave the physics unchanged. Charge conjugation flips particles into antiparticles. Parity reversal flips spatial orientation. Time reversal flips the direction of temporal flow in the equations. Individually, some interactions can violate parts of this symmetry. The weak force, for example, distinguishes left from right. But when all three operations are applied together, the full theory must remain invariant. This is not aesthetic. It is required for internal mathematical consistency of any local relativistic quantum field theory. What does that mean for antimatter? It means that for every particle described by such a theory, a corresponding antiparticle must exist. The existence of antiparticles is not a historical discovery layered onto physics. It falls directly out of the requirement that the equations remain consistent under these transformations. If you try to write down a relativistic quantum field theory for a charged particle and remove the antiparticle solution, the theory breaks. It either loses causality or allows negative probabilities. The mirrored excitation is not optional. It repairs the structure. So antimatter is not made of exotic additions to the universe. It is made of the unavoidable conjugate solutions of the same fundamental fields that produce matter. The mirror exists because the mathematics of space-time and quantum mechanics together demand it. That is the inevitability layer. The electron field does not allow a universe with only electrons. It mathematically requires the positron mode as well. The quark fields do not allow only quarks. They require anti-quarks. The mirror is not decoration. It is structural necessity. Now that the structure is stable, certain misconceptions fall away naturally. Antimatter is not negative mass. Mass never reverses sign. It is not gravitationally repulsive. Antimatter responds to gravity in the same way ordinary matter does because gravity couples to energy and mass, not to electric charge. Antimatter is not unstable by default. An antiatom in isolation does not decay simply because it is antimatter. Its stability depends on the same forces that govern ordinary matter. Antimatter is not a separate category of stuff stored somewhere else in the universe's inventory. There is no antimatter periodic table with different elements. Antihydrogen mirrors hydrogen. Antihelium mirrors helium. The chemistry would follow the same electromagnetic rules. Antimatter is also not composed of smaller unknown particles. A positron is not built from anti-subcomponents beneath the electron level, because the electron itself is fundamental in the Standard Model. Its antiparticle is simply the conjugate excitation of that same field. This clarification tightens the answer to the original question by removing imagined alternatives. Antimatter is not a new substance. It is matter composed of antiparticles, and antiparticles are the conjugate excitations of the same quantum fields that define ordinary particles. Nothing more exotic hides underneath. At this point, something quietly clicks into place. The question, what is antimatter made of, initially sounds like it should have a list answer, as though there might be some dark ingredient, some reversed atom, some exotic particle beneath it all. But every layer we have descended has removed that expectation. Antimatter is made of anti-electrons, anti-quarks, anti-protons, anti-neutrons. Those antiparticles are not made from alternate building blocks. They are excitations of the same underlying fields, with charge-like quantum numbers reversed. The same fields fill all of space. The same equations describe both orientations. The same forces bind them. The same mass-generating mechanism applies. The same conservation. Laws govern their creation and annihilation. Nothing new had to be introduced into the universe to allow antimatter. It was already there, embedded in the structure of the fields themselves. The mirror was never added. It was present from the start. That is the structural resolution. Antimatter is not made of different stuff. It is made of the same stuff, in the conjugate configuration that the mathematics of quantum fields inevitably permits. Imagine two particles approaching each other in empty space. One is an electron, the other is a positron. They are not exotic in isolation. Each is simply an excitation of the electron field, carrying equal mass, equal spin magnitude, but opposite electric charge and opposite lepton number. As they draw near, their electromagnetic interaction strengthens. Opposite charges attract. Their wave functions begin to overlap. What matters here is not collision in the mechanical sense, but compatibility in the field sense. They are conjugate excitations of the same underlying field. That detail is decisive. Because they belong to the same field, their quantum numbers are arranged in exact opposition. Electric charge cancels. Lepton number cancels. Momentum and energy remain conserved, but the charge-like bookkeeping columns sum to zero. Once those conserved quantities cancel locally, nothing prevents the field from relaxing back toward its lower energy configuration. The localized excitations disappear. The energy that had been stored in their mass and motion does not vanish. It reappears as excitations of the electromagnetic field, typically two photons moving in opposite directions to preserve momentum. This process feels dramatic because of the energy released, but structurally, it is the cleanest interaction in particle physics. It is possible only because matter and antimatter are built from the same field. Their conjugate properties allow perfect cancellation. If antimatter were made from a different substance, annihilation would not resolve so completely. Residual structure would remain, but nothing remains. The cancellation works because the composition is symmetric at the deepest level. Annihilation is not destruction of different materials, it is the neutralization of mirrored excitations of one and the same field. Picture that annihilation event again, but this time slow it down conceptually instead of visually. Two excitations approach. They do not fracture into fragments. They do not exchange pieces. They do not leave debris behind. They cancel. That cancellation only works because every charge-like quantum number is mirrored exactly. Electric charge sums to 0. Lepton number sums to 0. Any other conserved additive property also sums to 0. What remains after cancellation is pure energy, carried away as photons. This precision is not violence, it is symmetry resolving itself. If matter and antimatter were built from different underlying substances, annihilation would not be possible in this clean form. You would expect mismatched internal structure, leftover components, or incomplete conversion. But the energy released equals exactly the combined rest mass of the two particles, plus any kinetic energy they carried. The accounting closes perfectly. That closure tells you something decisive about composition. Antimatter cannot be made from alternate ingredients. If it were, annihilation would not convert entirely into radiation. There would be some structural remainder. Instead, the electron field excitation and its conjugate cancel into the electromagnetic field cleanly because they are modes of the same system. The symmetry is deep enough that cancellation is allowed. This means antimatter is not constructed from some hidden opposite matter stuff. It is constructed from the same field excitations whose defining quantum numbers are inverted. The cleanness of annihilation is evidence of sameness. Matter and antimatter are not rivals made of different materials. They are complementary configurations of one shared framework. We move next into how this framework scales upward beyond single particles. Now, imagine stepping back from a single annihilation event and looking at a collection of particles that never meet their opposites. An antiproton drifts through space. A positron approaches. Their electric charges attract. Nothing in the electromagnetic force distinguishes between matter and antimatter. Opposite charges attract. Always. The positron settles into a bound state around the antiproton. What forms is antihydrogen. Inside that system, the structure is familiar. The positron occupies quantized energy levels. It can jump between them. When it does, photons are emitted or absorbed at specific frequencies. Those frequencies match hydrogen exactly because the mass and interaction strength are identical. The equations that describe the atom do not change sign when you conjugate charge. They produce the same energy spectrum. This is not coincidence. Atomic structure depends on mass, charge magnitude, and the electromagnetic coupling constant. All of those remain unchanged in magnitude for antimatter. Only the sign of charge flips, and since atomic binding depends on opposite signs attracting, the same structure forms. Move further up. Antiprotons and antineutrons bind through the strong force into antinuclei. The binding energy is the same because the strong interaction treats quarks and antiquarks symmetrically. The confinement mechanism does not weaken for antimatter. Add positrons and you obtain antiatoms. There is no structural gap where antimatter stops working. No force behaves differently at the compositional level. The mirror extends seamlessly upward from quarks to nuclei to atoms. Antimatter is not just a particle-level phenomenon. It can build complete atomic systems. And those systems are made from antiquarks, anti-electrons, and antinucleons, all of which are conjugate excitations of the same fundamental fields as their matter counterparts. Composition remains parallel at every scale examined so far. Take everything we have established and press it downward once more. An anti-atom is made of antiparticles. An antiparticle is a conjugate excitation of a quantum field. That field fills all of space and supports both orientations equally. There is no deeper internal structure beneath the electron in the standard model. The electron is fundamental. Its antiparticle is not built from smaller anticomponents. It is simply the opposite charge excitation of the same field. The same holds for quarks. As far as current experiments can probe, quarks are fundamental. Antiquarks are not composed of smaller reversed fragments. They are the conjugate modes already embedded in the quark fields. So the compositional chain ends cleanly. Antimatter is not made of anti-substances beneath the particle level. There is no anti-layer under the field itself. The field is the foundation. What differs is the orientation of conserved quantum numbers within that field's excitation. Mass comes from interaction with the Higgs field. That mechanism does not flip sign. Spin arises from how the field transforms under space-time rotations. That does not flip magnitude. Electric charge and related quantum numbers arise from how the field couples to gauge symmetries. Those can reverse. That is the full structural separation. Antimatter is built from antiparticles. Antiparticles are conjugate excitations of the same fundamental quantum fields. There is no further material distinction beneath that. The mirror does not extend into a different substance. It terminates at the level of field orientation. This closes the compositional descent. One final stabilization remains. Now, bring the entire chain back into a single clear structure. Antimatter is not a different material layered beneath matter. It is not built from reversed mass. It is not constructed from alternate atoms. It does not hide a secondary periodic table. At the deepest level, reality is made of quantum fields. Those fields fill space. They allow discrete excitations. Some of those excitations carry electric charge and other conserved quantum numbers. For every such charged excitation, the equations of relativistic quantum field theory require a conjugate excitation with the same mass and spin but opposite charge-like properties. Those conjugate excitations are antiparticles. An anti-electron, or positron, is the electron field vibrating in its charge-reversed mode. An antiquark is the quark field vibrating in its conjugate orientation, carrying opposite electric and color charge. An antiproton is three antiquarks bound by gluons in the same way three quarks form a proton. An antiatom is a bound state of antiparticles assembled through the same electromagnetic interaction that builds ordinary atoms. No additional ingredients are introduced anywhere in this chain. Antimatter is made of antiparticles. Antiparticles are made of the same fundamental fields. The only structural difference lies in the inversion of charge-like quantum numbers. That is the compositional boundary. There is nothing beneath it within current theory. One final layer remains to state the answer without tension or leftover ambiguity. Strip the question down to its core one last time. What is antimatter made of? It is made of anti-electrons, antiquarks, antiprotons, antineutrons, and the composite structures formed from them. And what are those? They are not alternate substances. They are not reversed mass. They are not negative matter. They are not built from hidden anti-atoms beneath the familiar ones. They are the conjugate excitations of the same quantum fields that produce ordinary particles. The electron field fills space. It allows two orientations of excitation. One we call the electron, carrying negative charge, and one we call the positron, carrying positive charge. Both have identical mass. Both have identical spin magnitude. Both interact with the same strength. The quark fields do the same. They allow quarks and antiquarks. The strong force binds quarks into protons and binds antiquarks into antiprotons using the same confinement mechanism. The weak force transforms matter and antimatter in mirrored processes. The electromagnetic force binds particles and antiparticles into atoms with identical energy spectra. Mass arises from the same interaction with the Higgs field. Spin arises from the same space-time structure. Binding energies are generated by the same forces. Nothing new is introduced to build antimatter. No second layer of reality is required. Antimatter is made of the same fundamental fields, excited in the charge-conjugated orientation that the mathematics of quantum field theory inevitably allows. The mirror exists because the fields allow it. So the answer is not a list of exotic ingredients. It is a structural statement. Antimatter is matter built from antiparticles, and antiparticles are the unavoidable mirror excitations of the same fields that constitute everything around you. There is no deeper material beneath that within our current understanding. The difference between matter and antimatter is not what they are made of. It is how their conserved quantum properties are oriented. That is the entire compositional truth.